I'd like to again welcome everybody tonight. We have a very, very important subject that we're going to be discussing. We'll bring our speaker up in just a few minutes. But in the meantime, I would like to recognize all of our public officials that are in the audience. I see Cindy Mills in the back, so our District 4 Commissioner. Ann Crow, I know you're here somewhere. Over here. Thank you for coming. And Darla, I'm sorry, Light. And there's also, Ann and Darla are both on our Board of Education. So we welcome their presence tonight. As you came in, there's a table out there where we have some sign-up sheets if you would like to become members of the Forsyth County Tea Party. I hope you signed in so that we can keep in touch with you and let you know what's going on with the Forsyth County Tea Party meetings and events. Did I miss any public official photos? Just want to make sure. There's also, for those that have signed up before, we have some name tags out there. If you haven't got your name tag yet, there's also some window stickers. If anybody would like those, they can stick on their cars. The more we get the word out, the better off we'll be. So, anybody who is here tonight for the first time, thank you so much for coming. We would like for you to get more involved with the Forsyth County Tea Party, so hopefully you can fill out a membership application. We do have a free membership, but we would ask that you select one of the other memberships that actually donates to the Tea Party so that we can continue to hold events like this and have our monthly meetings and get involved in other activities. We just had our 4th of July parade. We participated in the 4th of July parade here in Cumming. It was a great parade, even though the weather was a little bit threatening. We got very lucky and did not get rained on, so it was a great day. I know everybody that participated had a good time. The Cumming Fair is in October. We'll be having a booth there. All these things are, they cost money to participate in, so we hope you consider becoming members and helping to support us financially. Okay, tonight our speaker is Ms. Tanya Ditty. She's the State Director for Concerned Women for America of Georgia, the nation's largest public policy women's organization. She's been an active member of CWFA since 1985 and serves on the National Board of Concerned Women for America. Tanya is on the front lines working to eradicate the Common Core standards from Georgia's public schools. She has collaborated with other key Common Core experts to create the Stop Common Core DVD and the Stop Common Core website. CWFA of Georgia is actively involved in moving legislation through the General Assembly and is involved with the upcoming Stop Common Core Education Summits being scheduled around the state. Tanya is proud to call herself pro-life, pro-family, pro-traditional marriage, and pro-Israel. She is an active lobbyist on these issues both in Atlanta and in Washington, D.C. She's a 20-year veteran educator who holds a Master's of Education degree in Instructional Technology. She currently teaches economics and U.S. government for a high school virtual academy, and she resides in Marietta, Georgia, so she's one of our neighbors over in Cobb County. Tanya has also been actively involved in anti-trafficking efforts for over 8 years. She's a charter member of Georgia's Rescue and Restore Coalition and has fought for the past 4 years for tough state anti-trafficking laws that provide law enforcement with tools to target the criminals of sex trafficking. Tanya most recently represented Concerned Women for America at the United Nations on a panel discussion to raise awareness of the sexual exploitation of women through sex trafficking. Please join me in a warm welcome for Ms. Tanya Ditty.
so just bear with me and let me get myself organized. I'm going to get my stopwatch going. So, there we go. All right. Well, I want to, again, welcome you this evening. Some of you, I passed out handouts, and if you did not get handouts, I am going to ask if someone can help me. I've got brochures, and if whoever needs one of these, thank you, Judy. I think I hit most everyone when they came in, and I'm going to be talking about those handouts too. But I'm delighted to be here tonight to talk about the Common Core. It has been my life since last June, and how I got started with it is I actually talked with a girl out of Senator Ligon's office who lives down in St. Simons, and we were talking education issues a year ago, January, and I just come out of I just quit my job in January out of the school system, and we have heard a lot about the Common Core and all of the workshops for the teachers, and so I was talking with Senator Ligon's policy advisor about this, and we were learning more about it. Then I heard Jane Robbins. I spoke with Jane Robbins, and if you've had an opportunity to see our DVD on YouTube, or I've got DVDs here this evening, we partnered with her to create a DVD to inform people about the Common Core. I spoke with her last April on the phone, but it wasn't until I heard her speak in person about the Common Core a year ago, June, that I got so angry about what was happening. And so I'm an activist by heart, and so we got together starting in August and September to put together this DVD. Then we worked with Senator Ligon's office to get legislation in place to start that last January, and we have been going full throttle. And it is just, I think, an issue of our time, one that I think has an opportunity to be reversed. And so my goal tonight is to educate you on why the Common Core is not good for Georgia, why it's not good for our country, and more importantly, what the alternatives are. As we have talked with the governor about this, I'll mention him a little later, but as a leader in the state, he's got to have alternatives. You just can't do away with something and not have something left. And so we have solutions. So we want to be solutions oriented, and I will share those solutions with you this evening as well. So I'm going to walk through, I'm going to be on the PowerPoint, and then I'll take questions and answers at the end, and we'll leave plenty of time for those. So the first question you might ask is, well, what in the world is the Common Core? I know it has to do with education, but what is it in its entirety? Most people hear about the Common Core standards, but really it's a bigger initiative. And so what I want to do is I'm going to define it, and then we're going to I'm going to tell you how we got here, and then I'm going to define each of the pieces. And it's funny, Judy came, I'm friends with Judy Kraft here, and she said, I forgot to give you these news articles. She gets the Atlanta Journal, God rest her soul. She pays for that subscription, but we're appreciative of it, and there's just new things happening every day on the Common Core. So I've got very relevant things to share with you this evening on where we're at. But here's what the Common Core is really it's called the Common Core State Standards Initiative, and there's 3 parts to it. It's huge, but we can boil it down to 3 things. It's national standards, and I want to make sure I know that I didn't say federal, because the standards really weren't pushed by the federal government, but there's the ties to the federal government. It's a national initiative. So they're national standards, national testing, and so instead of Georgia doing their own testing, CRCT, we do national testing, and data tracking. So what I'm going to do is I'll hit on each one of those as we go through the evening, and one thing I'll zone in on when I do standards, but the standards I'm talking about math and language arts. All right, so that is what the Common Core Initiative is. It's those 3 things coming down into our public education system. All right, so how did we get here? How did we end up with the Common Core standards in our state? One myth, or actually one fact that the proponents of Common Core want to state is that this was a state-led effort, and that is simply not true. What was happening behind the scenes, and we've got 3 players in this. One is the National Governors Association, which is a trade organization that is made up of governors and other people. It's not just governors, and not all governors are in the National Governors Association. The Council of Chief State School Officers is the trade organization for state school superintendents. Dr. Barge is a part of that. And then Achieve Inc. is kind of a daughter of these organizations. But the bulk of the work to bring in the standards and all the initiatives were done by Achieve Inc. They're a private organization that's funded mostly through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So the way I kind of put it is the standards were kind of laundered through these trade associations because they've got educational names attached to them. And so people kind of thought, oh, okay, we know that Governor Sonny Perdue was on the National Governors Association when this was all happening, but he really didn't sit and write the standards. They had people write the standards for them, and I'll talk about that. A little bit more about the trade associations. They receive up to 50 to 80% of their funding from the federal and state government. So they're not independent thinkers. They get their money from the federal and the state, and that tends to influence. Neither of these groups had any grant of authority to write standards. No authority was given to them. They did it anyway. And those are the kind of the players behind the scenes. They're all out of Washington, D.C. Well, the financer of all of this is mostly the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And I'm going to try to connect some dots for you with them in a minute. But they have poured, I'm going to give you a couple of examples of how much money they poured into this initiative. Now, they've not written the standards, but they have paid for the push of it and all of the education. They paid a lot of money to the PTAs to educate the PTAs. They've given money to the chambers of commerce. They've given money to any organization that's educationally focused that loves the Common Core. Guaranteed that they've gotten money from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Jeb Bush's organization has gotten money from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and he is very supportive of the Common Core. They have given, since 1999, $30 million to the National Governors Association and $70 million to the Chief State School Officers Association, those trade associations. So I'm not sure if I missed when we elected Bill Gates, but he seems to have a lot of influence over education, and he's not elected. So he has dumped tremendous amounts of money into this initiative. So then how does the federal government play a role in this? Well, back in 2009, we had the stimulus bill. And the proponents thought, okay, we've got some standards out there that are written, and we know that they have wanted to push national standards, for decades. And this would be a great time to be able to push those standards out into the states. Well, how can you rope the states into taking standards and the national test and the data tracking system? Well, they earmarked $435 billion from the stimulus bill and gave it to the U.S. Department of Education, and that money was then put on Race to the Top grants. In addition, there was $360 million of federal money that was given to 2 consortiums that are writing the national tests. So while the federal government didn't exactly, quote, write the standards, they are funding the push of the standards into the state. And they did it through the Race to the Top grant. I'm going to talk a little bit about how Georgia got into that. So that's the federal involvement. So you've got 3 sets of players. I'm going to back up. You've got the trade associations. You've got Bill Gates, who's funding most of this. And then you've got the federal government's involvement by having a little carrot of money on Race to the Top grants. So let's follow the money, just to see how everything is connected. I'm going to do this really quick. I put pictures of people up there because I always like to know what people look like. All right, so in 2009, the same time the stimulus bill was done, the National Governors Association hired it's Student Achievement Inc., it's a company, They were hired to help write the math and language arts standards. The math standards were written by 3 main writers, and one of them is Jason Zimba. The language arts had 2 major writers. One of them is David Coleman. Of the English language arts writers, none of them had any teaching background. The other one, other than David Coleman, she has some sort of education background, but she was an attorney with a school of education or something. I don't know all her details. But David Coleman now runs the College Board. And his goal in life is to have Common Core K through college. So he again, is the main writer of the language arts. All right, so the stimulus bill comes in. And again, like I said earlier, $435 billion is earmarked to the U.S. Department of Education for Race to the Top. All right, well, let's follow some money. There are 2 people that left the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to go work for the U.S. Department of Education at the same time that the stimulus grant was coming down. And I put their pictures up there. Margot Rogers is now Arnie Duncan's chief of staff, and Jim Shelton, look what he gets to do. He left the Gates Foundation, and now he's in the Department of Ed. He's managing some of that stimulus money invested in educational innovation. So I'm not I use Windows, and I like some of the stuff that the Gates makes technically, but he's got his fingers in our education pot. All right, so let's connect the dots. The Fordham Institute, Michael Petrelli of the Fordham Institute, and I'm going to mention them later, they are an education think tank, highly esteemed, except they've taken money from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And what they do is they go out and assess education, and they assessed our standards, and I'll talk about them in a minute. But look what Michael Petrelli said. It is not unfair to say that the Gates Foundation's agenda has become the country's agenda in education. Today, this is from Business Week, today the Gates Foundation and Educational Secretary Duncan move in apparent lockstep. 2 of Duncan's top aides came from the foundation and were granted waivers by the administration from its revolving door policy limiting involvement from former employers. It's a very incestuous relationship that's going on with the U.S. Department of Education and Bill Gates, and it's all being pushed down on us at the state level. Okay, so how then did Georgia get involved in this? So let's kind of bring it home a little bit. We got involved with this because our former governor, Sonny Perdue, and state school superintendent, Kathy Cox, decided that they wanted to apply for the Race to the Top grant as a part of the stimulus bill. So there's a lot of dates up here, and the whole reason that they're up here is so you can kind of get and recognize the rushed deadline to get this through. If that doesn't sound familiar, we've got to rush a bill through. So, we'll understand it once it's passed. This is exactly what they did with the Common Core. In November of 2009, the Race to the Top application was released. So the states had got that in 2009. And then in January 2010, the applications were due. Well, the problem is between November and January, the state legislature doesn't meet. And across the country, most state legislatures don't meet. So it was purposely done so it could circumvent the state legislature. So the Race to the Top application was due, and so in 3 months they had to, put it together. Now, if you go out online to the Georgia's Department of Education, that is a massive grant. Guess who helped write that grant? Guess who sent people into states to help write the grants? The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So they had their hands in the writing of part of our grant. All right, so in March, now, notice in March 2010 that the Common Core, the draft of the standards were released. We signed on to the Common Core by taking the Race to the Top grant before the standards were even written. Part of the Common Core grant, part of the Race to the Top grant said this. They weighted different things on the grant. So Georgia did not have to take a common set of standards as described in the Race to the Top grant. But if we didn't agree to do that, then our Race to the Top grant was scored lower and we weren't able to compete against the other states for this money. So the creators of the Race to the Top grant put 3 things in that grant and weighted them very heavily to make sure that states would agree with this or they wouldn't have a chance for the grant. And that was adopt a common set of standards, and the Common Core just happened to be written. They had to agree to be a part of national tests, and they had to agree to build a student database, a student data tracking system. And Georgia agreed to do that. We had a panel discussion last month, and we had a guy on the panel from Massachusetts. And Massachusetts had the highest level of and the highest rated standards across the country. They applied for the Race to the Top grant, but they didn't take the Common Core standards because they already have high standards. Well, they didn't get the grant. They reapplied for the grant later and said they would take the Common Core standards, and guess what they got? The grant. So a lot of money tied to that. So in March, the draft Common Core standards were released and were posted on the DOE website. That is a rule that they have to post them. And this is how the state says, well, people knew about it. Well, they posted them for 30 days, and it's a massive grant. So we had 30 days to look at the standards. Finally, in June, the Common Core standards were released, the final adoption of them, and our state school board, in less than a month, signed off on them. So they didn't even review them. Or if they did, they reviewed them at a high level. And finally, in August, the final state commitments were due, and we accepted them. So I will say, by executive fiat, we were rope-tied into these standards. There was not a bottom-up approach to this grant writing process. There were 5 people that wrote for that grant. So that's how Georgia got into it. One other way that we got into it is the waiver from No Child Left Behind. If you adopt Common Core, then you can get a waiver. We only had 26 school districts with the Race to the Top grant, so this is the rest of the school districts. This is how we have Common Cores through the No Child Left Behind waiver. All right, so Common Core opponents always say that this was a state-led effort. Well, certainly states have followed, but they did not ever lead. Governor Sonny Perdue was at the table, and he was given a big position at that table. But I will tell you, there wasn't much happening else at the table with Georgia involvement. So on that. All right, so let's talk about then what this means for us. All of this was done without legislative oversight. They did not do a long-term analysis. This was never given to the legislature to do any sort of long-term cost analysis. There was no public meetings around the state on the standards. It did not present a long-term, they didn't present a long-term budget to the General Assembly. And the General Assembly wasn't even officially notified of the Common Core. Now, we often will hear this. We heard this as we were working the road lines down the Capitol. Well, the legislature should be writing the standards. That's not their job. Well, I agree that we have a Department of Education with professionals that they've got that professional background to do standards, but this came with a hefty price tag. And the General Assembly should be involved with that. And because there's such a dramatic shift of ideology with the Common Core, I think the legislators who represent our voice needed to be aware of it, that none of that happened. We were shut out of the process, and it was all done on purpose. Because they knew people like you and me would raise Cain about it. So what has been lost over the Common Core standards and the whole initiative? We've lost state sovereignty over education. And we're going to talk a little bit about what did it mean when we committed to the Common Core. Because we don't have any control at the local level over anything. If there's a problem with the math standards, no one can go to a local school teacher, to the local school board, to Dr. Barge, to Governor Deal to say anything. We're pushed out of the picture. It's all being controlled with special interests. I'll talk a bit about that in a minute. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the standards. I want to spend more time on this because there's new stuff coming out on the standards. Like I said earlier, the Common Core standards are the math and English language arts. Those are the ones that were adopted on here. And they're a set of K through 12 national standards. And here's what they say about the standards. or what we say about the standards and why we're concerned. First of all, the standards that our kids are learning now and our teachers are teaching, they were never vetted, tested, or piloted anywhere. So they're brand new. And we can't change anything on them, and I'll talk about that in a second. They claim that they're rigorous, evidence-based, and will make students college ready. Well, if they've never been tested or piloted, how do they know that? How do they know that they're rigorous? You hear that all the time. If you're out in the public school system, this is, for the past 3 years when I was in the public school system, all we heard was rigorous, rigorous, rigorous. They're going to be rigorous. You know, that word is so, it is just so yesterday. It's just, I'm so tired of hearing it. Curriculum experts believe that the Common Core standards are below average and only prepare students for a community college rather than a 4-year university. So let's prove that. Let me make one comment about the standards on why we're concerned. When Georgia agreed to the Race to the Top, they agreed to a common set of standards, which happens to be the Common Core. When we signed on to them, we had to accept those standards 100%. We can't change them. We can't remove anything. We can add 15% above that 100%. But if that has to be added to the test, then it's going to cost to add that content to the test. So right now, if you talk to a teacher in the classroom in English language arts, for example, they'll say, oh, everything is fine because I'm still able to teach what I did last year. You know, things kind of look the same with the standards. Well, that's because the national tests haven't come out yet. And the minute the tests come out, then they're going to have to test to what exactly the curriculum standards are. So that's just going to be a real wake-up call. But we can't change any of them. And we hear that out of Georgia Department of Education. Oh, we can change them. The standards are copyrighted by special interest groups. They are owned by the National Governors Association. So we can't change anything unless we get the approval from them. So we're stuck and straddled with them. So let's talk a bit about the math standards and why we have some concerns, and then I'll do my show and tell with the paper because the math has been getting some attention. All right, Dr. James Milgram is a mathematician from Stanford University. He was the only mathematician on the validation committee that refused to sign off on the standards. That handout that I gave you, this brochure, on the front, it's got our website, stopcommoncore.com. We have actually posted his comments on why he did not sign off on the standards. And there's some typos in there, but that's just kind of his original draft thoughts, so I just thought I'd let you know that. So it's worth going out and looking at. And this is what he says. He said the reason he didn't like it, number one, algebra will be delayed until the 9th grade. And what are they doing with geometry? We're teaching geometry that's never worked anywhere in the world. Actually, they tried it, I think, in Germany or Denmark or one of those countries over there. And it was so unsuccessful that they stopped doing it, but we're teaching it. So now let's talk about why, what's missing in the standards and why this 8th to 9th grade move of algebra is so critical. Also on the Stop Common Core website, we just posted this today. There is a math professor, Dr. Mary Kay Bacalao. She teaches at Mercer University. She teaches teachers how to teach math. She went out and she did a comparison chart. She took weeks. She looked at the Massachusetts math standards, which were the highest in the country. She put them in a column in Excel. Then side by side of that, she put the Georgia Performance Standards of Math, and then she put the Common Core. She wanted to see what was missing in the Common Core and why it wasn't good. You can actually go and download that. When you go out to the site, go under, show me the evidence under standards. It's listed right at the top. But here's what she has found. Probability, the teaching of probability is gone in elementary schools. We actually had a parent who was for Common Core, just didn't seem to have a problem with it. But you know, probability that is a basis, it's a basic, but that's completely gone in the elementary grades. Mean, median, snowed and rained are gone in elementary schools. That's your basis for statistics. The concept of pi, including area and circumference of circles, it's completely gone in elementary school. I live in Cobb County, and the Cobb County School Board had a huge debate on whether to purchase textbooks aligned to the Common Core. That didn't happen, and we're very grateful for those school board members that chose to hold off to see what's going to happen with the Common Core in the state. But there was a guy that testified, sorry, I lost my train of thought. He tutors math. And he brought all sorts of circular things with him to say, okay, he held up a DVD. He said, in order to be able to produce a DVD, if you're in that world, then you have to know pi. If you want to make a circular donut, make the cast for that donut, you've got to know pi. There's so many things that we have to know about pi. That's gone in the elementary grades. All right, what else is missing? The fundamental theorem of arithmetic, completely gone. Now, I am not a math person, but in my study of this, what I have learned is if you know math, the fundamental theorem of arithmetic, prime factorization, is the proven way to do math. And they've scrapped it. It's gone. Using fractions, decimals, and percents interchangeably, gone. So if you ask a student what, 1 over 2, 1/2, convert that to a decimal. That's gone. What else is gone? Okay, this isn't taught until after 5th grade. Measurement, density, velocity, and scientific notations. The basics for just knowing science. Division of a fraction by a fraction is gone in elementary. Algebra, inadequate readiness in the elementary grades. It's moved from 8th grade to 9th grade. The majority of Georgia students will not reach calculus in high school, as expected by selected universities. And then I've mentioned geometry, inadequate readiness for geometry, plus they're not teaching it the way that we used to. Let's talk a little bit about algebra. Algebra is a gateway course. Kids have to have algebra to get to the higher math levels. This is what we hear. Oh, don't worry about it. You'll be able to take algebra in the 8th grade. The students will be able to do that. Well, I've been around public schools enough to know that principals are given allotments every year for the number of teachers that they have to have in their school. And if Common Core says you're not teaching algebra until the 9th grade, those principals are not going to allot teachers for algebra. So they're not going to do that. And matter of fact, in the paper, this is in the Atlanta paper, the one that I was reading today, this is the one that came out today, yeah, today's the 15th. Next math hurdle ahead, tough geometry class awaits 10th graders. And they talk about the math failure on the algebra test, prompts more training for teachers. They're just claiming that the tests are more rigorous, but the kids aren't getting it. But what they've admitted in the paper is that algebra is no longer going to be in 8th grade, it's in 9th grade. So all we've heard is that's not true, but it's here in the paper stated by the state school board. So what's this mean for kids? Well, if they want to go on to selected universities like UGA, University of, Georgia Tech, all these high-level schools, they've got to have that high-level math. Well, if you don't do algebra until the 9th grade, you'll never get to those higher levels unless you've got a parent pushing you. The kids might go take it online if they're in the 8th grade, take an online class of algebra. We're pushing our kids behind. Remember when Dr. Milgram said our kids will be 2 years behind? This is why. They're slowing it down. One other thing to note, and I need to move on. This mom that I sit by in choir at church, I keep talking to her about this. She has a 5th grader. She said, I'll tell you, my daughter, she says, it is the most rigorous math. And I said, well, it was meant to be. It was meant to really push the kids in the elementary grades, and then they'll kind of slowly wean it off of them. And then it doesn't get as rigorous at the higher levels. So they might be pushing it now, but when they finally get in their routine of what they have to teach, it won't be that way on that. So that is what's going on with math. Here's an example of a 2nd grade math example. This is from a mom out of Cobb. And her daughter was bringing work home, and just real quickly, on the right-hand side, in second grade, they're learning 9 plus 4 is 13. Well, no longer can you do just regular 9 plus 4 is 13. They've got to circle things. I don't know if I have a little buzzer on here, but you'll see where they're circling the 9, and then they're dividing out the 4 and the 1 and the 3. And you see how cumbersome it is? These kids are coming home totally confused. My neighbors behind me, I said, what's going on with Common Core? The moms couldn't figure out what was off in the classroom this year. This because the kids were so frustrated. And they were coming home because of this new way to teach. They actually have to take parent helps home to teach the parents on how to teach this math. These little second graders. This is a kindergarten math problem. I'll read it for you. Kristen has 4 flowers. She gives her friend some flowers. Now Kristen has 2 flowers. How many did Kristen give her friends? Draw to solve the problem. Trace and write to complete the subtraction sentence. Tell a different subtraction word problem about the flowers. Draw to show how you solve the problem. Tell a friend about the drawing. Kindergarten. That's confusing for me as an adult. They have in elementary schools, the teachers are trained on how to do math talks because the kids now have to talk through the math problems. They can't just work the problem and move on. They've got to explain it all. And this is what the kids are getting frustrated on. Can we just not go 9 plus 4 is 13 and move on? No, they have to write it out, explain it out, tell them how they feel about their answers, and move on. Now, you think, oh my gosh, why is this so bad? Because the national tests are going to require that the kids teach this way. So if you're a homeschooling parent, and we know that they're going to align Common Core K through college, which means it's going to impact the ACT and the SAT. If you're a homeschooler or a private school, you will eventually catch up to the Common Core because you're going to have to take those tests, and your kids are going to have to answer this way. Up in Indiana had 2 moms who overturned the Common Core, and what sparked them to do that is one of the moms, the daughter brought home a homework assignment or a test or whatever, and it was math. And they said the daughter got the answer wrong. She was real upset, and it goes something like this. Jane Robbins knows the example better. I'll just give you something like it. I think it was like the bridge A is 400 feet and bridge B is 500 feet. Which bridge is longer and why? Well, the little girl put bridge B because 500 is greater than 400. She got it wrong. She didn't explain it the Common Core way, and she got the question wrong. That's what is going to happen when kids go to these tests. And you know what's sad about all of this is we're losing our seasoned teachers. Seasoned teachers know how to teach this kind of thing. They know where the kids trip up, and they no longer can teach them so that the kids can move on and excel. They have to stop and do all of this. Little kids are crying. They're frustrated. Now this, I can't say that this is strictly a Common Core question, but it wasn't a room where they were teaching Common Core. But that's just ludicrous. All right, so let's go on to English Language Arts. Here's a hero, Sandra Stotsky. She is probably the leading authority of language arts in the country. She actually worked with Massachusetts to have the highest language arts standards. She was on the validation committee and refused to sign off on them. And we've got her statements on stopcommoncore.com as well if you want to go out and read why she didn't like them. She said that the language arts standards are empty skill sets that won't prepare students for authentic college work. And she goes in and explains why on that. Matter of fact, and I've got to post this, Conserve Women for America did a conference call with Dr. Stotsky and a couple other people that are experts on the Common Core, and she was on, and she spent 45 minutes explaining it. And I'm going to put on the Stop Common Core site. You can call in and listen to the recording if you want to hear directly from her why she's very concerned about the dumbing down of our language arts standards. An example is they're doing away with fiction and moving more to nonfiction. We get arguments in this all the time that this isn't happening, but I sat and heard an 8th grade lead person in language arts sit and tell the other teachers that they will eventually get to 50% nonfiction. Now, why is that disturbing? Well, first of all, the classics teach kids to be good readers. But when you get over in the nonfiction, we're talking who's choosing what the nonfiction is. Well, let me give you a Georgia example. This is in Georgia. This is a lesson plan that came off the Georgia Department of Education that we posted it on our Facebook page and said, you got to look at this, parents. Go out and look at this lesson plan, and they pulled it. They yanked it off, but it's still circulating out there. We got this from a 10th grade American Lit teacher somewhere in Georgia. You know, teachers that oppose the Common Core won't speak up. They've been threatened, they're told just to go along, and they're afraid to speak up. So I just want to read you what he said. Here's an example of one of the standards out of our 10th grade class. Well, before I get to this one, I'll do this example. He said, as I deliver the federally mandated lessons, I am shocked to see the extreme liberal bias in the English lessons. One lesson that came out just before the presidential election asked the students to look at Mitt Romney's controversial Mormon religion. Do you know who they tied it to? Is Ellen Wiesel, who people highly respect. And then you say, well, that teacher didn't have to do that lesson. Well, in this school system, I asked him about this. All of the American Lit teachers in the school system came to a consensus on what they were going to teach. Because remember, everything's got to be common. That's what it's all about, Common Core. And if they're going to purchase literature, then they've got to purchase what everyone's going to use. So the idea that teachers can do whatever they want is just simply not the paradigm by which teachers teach anymore. Everything is common. All right, in another novel, In the Time of Butterflies, the characters are getting drunk and praising Fidel Castro and his revolutionaries. My history tells me he has always been a ruthless dictator. The character in the novel names her children after Castro's men. I had to stop reading this novel in class because of the strong sexual content. I wouldn't let my own children read this, and there are many instances of the characters having sex where the scene was described. He said, I began to research the author, Julia Alvarez, I put a picture up there for you, and I saw her on YouTube where this author was receiving an award. Well, instead of thanking the ones responsible for the award, she began to fawn over President Obama, sounding like a schoolgirl with a crush on the man. There's no doubt that the Common Core is coming directly from our current liberal federal government, but I dare say if the parents of Georgia school children could see that it is being delivered against the will of many of the teachers, they would not be happy. He had to go and ask his principal to get permission just to pull out the old textbooks right now so he could do some classics. But that's what's being taught. These are the types of lesson plans that are being produced by teachers and are put on the Georgia DOE website. Again, they pulled this off, and but that's what's out there. All right, to kind of wrap up this part and kind of move on to some conclusions here. The Thomas B. Fordham Institute, again, was paid by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to go out and grade the standards of the states. This is what they said about Georgia's performance standards prior to the Common Core. They were better for the language arts, they were better organized, easier to read, more logically, more rigorous. American literature, there's that word, better at identifying writing expectations. On the math standards, they were more rigorous, they were easy to follow, they were more coherent, and they were easy to navigate. I think we got a B plus, or a B plus, or an A minus. We were above the Common Core. So my question is, why would we shackle ourselves to the federal government when our standards were equal or better? Why did we turn over that authority? If something's wrong with our standards, why can't we do it in Georgia? But we've turned it over to standards that are less than what we have. All right, so let's talk then about testing and how the testing is going to drum along curriculum. So standards versus curriculum. This is what Georgia Education Policy Advisor told us during the legislative session. The standards guide teachers into what to teach, not how to teach. I agree with that. Standards are just a framework of what you have to teach. The teacher has the latitude to use whatever curriculum he or she chooses to teach the curriculum. And I say, really? That is simply not going to be the case when the national tests come out. All right, here are a couple of quotes. This is from the U.S. Department of Education. Some of the major benefits of common standards will be the coordination of information that could inform the development and implementation of curriculum. And I don't want the federal government, I don't care whether you've got the most conservative person leading the country or the most liberal, the federal government does not need to be imposing its ideology onto the states. That should be a state function. All right, the park, which I'm going to talk about, is the testing coordination. They're actually setting up model content frameworks because they're creating national tests, and you're going to have to teach to them. All right, so one other thing. Now, this guy, this is a kind of a new quote that we found. Now, he is a superintendent out of Colorado, so just to be upfront on that. But listen to what he says. Common Core is a more centralized testing and curriculum system for kids. We'll have to teach nonfiction. Listen to what he says about teachers. Letting teachers exercise professional judgment and what to teach in their classrooms is no way to run a school. Now again, he's from Colorado. I've never heard a superintendent in our state say that, but I dare say we've got some ideology sitting down at the Department of Education who has handed over our rights to do this. And who knows if they think the same way, but that is the ideology coming out of superintendents across the country. Okay, so how then will we get to curriculum being pushed down? And it has to do with the testing. I'm going to just talk a bit on this. Remember I told you Race to the Top, Georgia had to agree to national testing? We are a part of the PARC. It's a set of states, it's a consortium of states, it's the Partnership for Assessment of Readiness for College and Career, so it's the PARC. I think there's 21 states in that. And they were given, between Smarter Balance and PARC, they were given $360 million in federal dollars to write these tests. And I like this comment, it's a brave new world of student testing. Now, let me give you a little... I'll tell you a little bit about this, and then a real aha that we got from Dr. Barge on this. Okay, so how much is the Common Core going to cost? The heaviest cost is going to be in the testing, and that was covered in the paper last week. The AJC covered it, and then it was picked up by a lot of local papers. Common Core test too costly for Georgia? Question mark. Yeah, and this is what the governor's concerned about this. Dr. Barge is concerned about this. We all should be concerned. We as taxpayers got straddled with an unfunded mandate on testing. In 2006 and 2007, Georgia spent $8 a student in testing. With the Common Core and the PARC testing, and that's only for language arts and math testing, they estimate $100 per student. According to the newspaper, the current Georgia estimate for when they start taking just the math and language arts test, $27.5 million. The budget, according to the paper, for testing, all testing, $25 million for all testing. Lowball, it estimates $16 billion. Well, why that's so expensive? It's all technology driven. Now I know Forsyth County is wealthy when it comes to technology. You all have invested a tremendous amount of money in your technology. You're a leader. Before I quit my job, I was actually up here touring the flipped classroom and the bring your own technology. And you had something here in December. And so you're a leader. Cobb County is the same. They have a lot of technology. But you go out to these smaller districts. We had a superintendent testify on our bills, and he said this will break the smaller communities because there's no money at the state level to pay for the bandwidth and all the computers and so forth. And so it's going to all come down to the local taxpayers. Unfunded mandate through the national tests. And they said, well, you can do paper pencil. That costs more. So this is just going to, it's breaking the bank on this. So let me talk really, make two comments on the testing. The national tests are going to be written. They come out next year in the 2014-2015 year in Georgia, and the kids will take them. Teachers' evaluations, 50% of their evaluations are going to be tied to student performance on the tests. So if you are a renegade seasoned teacher who knows Common Core is bad and decides they're going to teach their own way in the classroom, when the kids do poorly on the test and your evaluations are poor, what do you think that teacher's going to do? They're either going to quit or they're going to teach the Common Core way. The tests are going to force the way the teachers teach, and they're going to force how they teach and what they teach because of their evaluations. Thus, that's what's driving curriculum. So it's disingenuous for the governor and everyone down to say we're only about standards in the state of Georgia. One other thing, Dr. Barge told us this at a breakfast over in Cobb, and it's in this article, that the governor is very concerned about the cost of this. So he asked Dr. Barge to go to the consortium and say, can you maybe reduce the number of tests at certain grade levels? So just ask. The consortium said no. Who is in control of our education? The governor couldn't even get an answer yes. So they were refused. And the paper says Dr. Barge went, but he did say at the breakfast that he was asked, the governor asked for him to ask on his behalf, and he was declined. So, you got to get 22 other states to agree with you. Okay, so now, how are the feds tracking your child? This is the third part of the the Common Core initiative. And remember the stimulus bill. Part of the stimulus bill, through the Race to the Top grant, the states had to agree to build a massive database system. And Georgia has done that. It's called the State Longitudinal Data System. I will say the SLDS, it's multifaceted. Part of the system has resources that teachers can look at and share. It's a place where they can share resources. But a part of it is the tracking of the students. Now, I will say this as well, that, in the old days, if a parent moved from Cobb County to Forsyth County, nothing was digital, so you had to get the records and take them with you. And it really hurt, especially if you had a special ed child, because oftentimes there were IEPs and all of these things that really needed to come with the child. And, it took a lot to get that information. So inside of Georgia, to build a connected system where schools within Georgia can get their records, I don't know that I have a problem with that. I think that is progressive in a positive way. But what the problem is now where that data is going to go outside of it. That's the problem. All right, so I'm not stuck back in the 18th century on digital stuff, but that we have built that. And we had to because we signed on the Race to the Top. All right, now here's the catch. Back in May, Governor Deal signed an executive order stating that Georgia would not turn over any student identifiable data to the federal government. Well, he can't. That's fine. I think he's recognized that is a concern of parents. But the Park Consortium, Georgia has a contractual obligation, a signature by being a part of the consortium that they are obligated to turn over student level data. Out on our Stop Common Core site, you can go out and look at it. You can go out and see where we had to sign off on that. So we have to sign, we've signed an agreement with the federal government. I'm just going to kind of read a couple of these pieces. It requires the collection and sharing of student level information resulting from testing. This information will follow children all of their lives, even in the college and career, because we're into the college and career thing as well. Okay, let me see. All right, so a parent goes into school and they say, well, this can't happen because we have got the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, FERPA. I heard this all the time when I was in public school. You can't do this with student data because of FERPA. Parents think their kids' data is protected. Well, this administration gutted FERPA through regulation. There are 3 federal statutes that say that the federal government can't be involved in curriculum writing, and there's also a statute that says you can't share student identifiable data with the U.S. Department of Education. Well, the Obama administration has gone in and they've gutted FERPA, and it is free to flow. And here's who gets it. Let me see. It says that this now means that once a student or teacher, by the way, it impacts teachers as well, data is handed over to the federal government, all without consent, that data can be shared with any public or private entity with the department that the department designates as an authorized representative. They could have a next door neighbor be an authorized representative. What we know is authorized representatives are now going to be the U.S. Department of Labor, the U.S. Department of Health. So student records are going to be turned over to these agencies. All because we signed on to the PARC testing, and we have an obligatory thing to do that. So we think that Governor Deals did a step in the right direction with the executive order, but it didn't do anything on that. All right, intrusive data tracking. I told you they gutted FERPA. The U.S. Department of Education intends to capture, analyze, and use student data from preschool to high school, college, and the workforce. That's a quote off their site. There was an article written back last July. It was in the Augusta Chronicle. We have that posted on our website. It's called Georgia Building System to Track Students from Preschool to PhD. They have the ability, they haven't gotten there yet, to track over 400 data points on students. And if you go out to the U.S. Department of Ed, there is a book. I don't know if it used to be posted on their main site, now you have to dig for it. It's called Promoting Grit, Tenacity, and Perseverance, Critical Factors for Success in the 21st Century. If you download that, we've learned that we have to download and save everything because things are disappearing off the U.S. Department of Ed sites. This is where they're even going to track just how a student perseveres in the class. And it's an interesting read on, they're not just grading on whether they're good at math, language arts, but how good are they at grit, tenacity, all those types of things. That's very Orwellian to me. Look at this quote. This is from Datapalooza, October 2012. We collect billions of records of data. We're pulling data from everywhere, tens of thousands of places. Common Core is the glue that ties everything together. And that is by Sean Bay, he's the CEO of eScholar. Well, on top of that, let's talk a little bit about InBloom. InBloom is part of the it's a foundation set up by Bill and Melinda Gates. And it is being tested in 9 states, and Georgia is one of them. Now, we are a Tier 2 state. Dr. Barge swears that we're not turning this data over, but the whole concept of InBloom is to turn student data over to vendors. I think I have that up here. This is from the Bill Gates fact sheet. In addition to making instructional data more manageable and useful, this open license technology will also support a large market for vendors of learning materials and application developers to deliver content and tools to meet the Common Core state standards. This is how it kind of works. So I kind of explained just coming out of a school system. You might have a vendor come to the central office and they'll talk to someone in maybe the instructional technology department. They'll say, we've got this great resource, it's called Study Island, and we'd like to sell it to your schools. And so they might do that, and they would get a district license. Well, if the district didn't want it, then the vendors would hightail it out to the schools that might have Title I money, or they'll just go out to individual schools and meet with the principals. If the school districts allow that, then that's fine. And so they'll go out and start selling it to individual schools. Well, see, that's becoming too much of a burden for vendors. What they want is a central place where they can collect all this data from all these kids, and they'll say, we're going to come up with a great resource for you. And the way that they're able to do that is they're taking student data. And in Bloom is allowed that. Again, we did an open records request at the Department of Education on In Bloom. And we've gotten all sorts of information on, they're a little concerned that people are now onto this. But they, In Bloom has set up their office in Atlanta. They're moving into Atlanta. And kind of the arms out to this has to do, it's run by, who owns Fox? Murdoch. Yeah. Kind of wondered why Sean Hannity hasn't picked up on this as much, and we think a lot of it has to do with the ties to Richard Murdoch. Okay. All right, Mark Tucker, back from the Hillary Clinton days, famous for the Dear Hillary letter, this is what he said. The federal government should, quote, remold the entire American system for human resource development. A seamless system of unending skill development that begins in the home with the very young and continues through school, post-secondary education, and the workplace. The Common Core Standards is a workforce development system. That's what it's all about. It wants to train, it wants to hold the kids back. I truly believe this. If you look at the way they're slowing down math, they want to hold them back. They want to pigeonhole kids into being little worker bees. And that's what their goal was. That's what Mark Tucker's goal was, and that's coming to fruition through the Common Core. So, where are we today? You can take action. We actually have, I passed out to you, it's reasons to support some bills. It's on this sheet of paper. And also in your pamphlet, if you open it up, right in the middle, we give you phone numbers and everything that you can do. We truly believe that Common Core can be reversed in Georgia. We didn't think we were going to get anywhere with this, but we had two bills. One had a hearing. The governor's done an executive order, and hundreds of phone calls went into his office. 3 weeks ago, we did a light up the switchboard, and they got hundreds of phone calls. And so he's hearing the grassroots, but it will only happen in the grassroots because he likes it. So here's what you can do today to help eradicate this. Number one, educate yourself. You notice Common Core, it's a huge, huge issue. You can go to stopcommoncore.com. We also have out there, I'm looking for my DVD, we have a YouTube video that we did that's 33 minutes in length, and it tells you everything you need to know about the Common Core, and it is still relevant. We did it in October, and it is still relevant. I have them here for sale for $5 if you want one. But it is the best way to educate people on it. All right, help and support Senate Bill 167 and Senate Bill 203. When we did our calls to the governor's office, kind of near noon, we were getting comments back from people in email that says, well, the governor's office said these are dead bills. So we called back down and said, these aren't dead bills. So they were being disingenuous about that. These two bills are still alive and will be taken back up in the session that starts in January. Senate Bill 167 completely withdraws Georgia out of the Common Core, out of the testing, out of the database system. Actually, it prohibits data going outside the state of Georgia, and then it prohibits the adoption of future curriculum, i.e. social studies and science, which we're concerned about. So we give you the reasons why this is a great bill. On the back, we said, look, Common Core, they just did it. Well, we want to set up an advisory method by which to review future standards, starting with math and language arts. The Department of Education says, but we already have that in place. But they said, well, you didn't follow it when we did Common Core. So we have to put it in by law, that they'll follow that, so we're not strapped like we have. We need support on these bills. And the way that you can support is call the governor, pick up the phone tomorrow morning and call his office and ask him to please support Senate Bill 167 and 203. What we're afraid is they're going to pull out of the testing and not pull out of anything else. And we just can't let that happen because the standards are so bad. Call Dr. Barge's office. Dr. Barge ran against the Common Core and now he's for it. Governor Deal ran, when he ran the last time, ran that he didn't like any race to the top money, too many strings attached. Now he likes it. So he's told us that. We had a meeting with him in March, and he seems to like the race to the top money. He thinks it's done a great thing for Georgia. Those two people, we have got to have the governor on board. And he has got to hear from the people in the state on that. All right. You need to call your state representatives and state senator, whoever represents you. I think Senator Jack Murphy represents most of you. You need to call him because I don't know that he's on our side on this. You need to call Representative Mike Dudgeon, who I hear now is not on our side. I was disappointed. He's sharp, and I'm so disappointed that he is not on our side on this. You know, educate him. You know, just educate your representatives on why this isn't good. And if anything, it all comes down to who has control. Cobb County said, we are still going to do Common Core whether the state does away with it or not. You know, great, but guess who had the choice to do it? The local school board had the choice to do it, and they have to answer to their local constituents. So if they want to choose to do it, that's fine, but that's the whole idea. We need to have control of it. But our legislators, it's got to move out and move through the legislature. And they will do it. They've got to hear from you. We've got to put pressure on them. If you see them, I threw up some questions. If you see them at some events, here's some good questions to ask them if they do any sort of town halls. Ask them, what is your opinion of why the only Republicans in the state who don't see the problem with Common Core are the elected officials? Or what can you do to break through the propaganda coming from the Georgia DOE and the governor's office? Here's a couple more. If legislators no longer care about the Constitution, state sovereignty, local control, and parental rights, would you at least be open to an argument that Common Core is going to bankrupt us? As a legislator, would you personally be willing to defy the governor on this if he threatened you? Okay, get my point on that. All right, so contact your school districts, contact your school board. They have got to hear from you. I will tell you, teachers, there's not a thing that they can do about it, but if you go to them and they go to the principal and they go to the school board, they have got to hear from you. Don't discount. And don't let teachers just give you the Common Core talking points, because that's what happened at the beginning of the year in Cobb. They just all regurgitated the Common Core talking points. Contact the media. This is great media coverage. And the papers are picking up on it. Write letters to the editor. Get connected. We have a Facebook page we post stuff on. We have a petition. And if you want to receive email alerts, you can sign up through my email address. Now, there's a couple ways to do this. You can give us a point of contact for your Tea Party group, and then we communicate to your Tea Party, and then you send it out. Or you can sign up. My email address is on here. We have a specific email alert list only for the Common Core. That's all you're getting. So the next time we do our Light Up the Switchboard, which is going to be next week, you'll get that information. But I'll do whatever you want to do. So on that, I have no problem with that. All right. All right. See these nice kids? These are our kids. These are our children. These are not the national government's children. They're not the federal government's children. They're not Governor Deal's children. They're not Dr. Barge's children. They're not the school board's children. These are our children. And we need to get sovereignty back in our education by pushing out the Common Core, and we can do it. We can do it. And that is all I have. So I am done, and I will be happy to take questions. Yes?
I remember being in, I first of all apologize to you for what I'm about to say. But until you and all the people against Common Core understand where this is coming from and what they are intending to do, there's not much you can do. You've got to stop Uncle Sam entirely, because Obama has signed in with the United Nations and Common Core and Agenda 21 and all of these. They come from the United Nations, and they are intending to change our history. They're intending to change our education. And I can tell you, I've already talked to the governor's office and I've talked to Barge's office. Not to them, but to their office. And they don't care what you think or what I think. They are intending to push this through, and you can't stop it at the state. You've got to stop the federal government.
Okay, and I'll make a couple comments on that. I don't disagree with anything that you said, but what we have learned through this process, this is an education issue. The 10th Amendment says that we have a right to control education at the state level. Therefore, it is a state issue as far as the governor is concerned, because he can change this through legislation. It wasn't brought in under his watch. Now, you might disagree, but we feel like we are making some traction, because as people are educated on this issue, this is one issue that we feel like we've been able to isolate. And I'm not saying it's not tied to those other things. But I can tell you today that if the UN fell into the Hudson River tomorrow, there would still be people in our country that wants to push the Common Core. They want to push the Common Core. And again, I'm sure there's bigger ideologies behind it. I am not discounting that. But our focus is 2 pieces of legislation that can pull Georgia out of the Common Core. I was at a breakfast a month ago at a public policy foundation, and there was a guy from California that was there to talk about online learning. And every time they have someone come to talk on education, they talk about the Common Core first. His comment, he's from California, and by the way, he's also on Emblem's board, so I know he's tied to all of this. I mean, they know that Common Core is really, really strong, and that it's going to crush under the weight of what they're trying to do. And what we're trying to do is help push that along faster. So for a guy to stand up there who is on the board for Bloom to publicly state in front of Dr. Barge and everybody else, there were legislators there as well, to say that it might come to a point where some states have the right to pull out. His comment was, well, probably 15 states will pull out and the rest won't. Well, I don't agree with that, because states want their sovereignty on this. They're finally realizing what they bought into. And it is something that can be isolated and pulled out. So that's kind of my comment on that. And I totally just respect what you say, but we know that we're focusing on this issue, and one way that we can do it is to get traction on these bills. And we truly believe that the governor and Dr. Barge, they're hearing us, but they have to hear louder, and so do your legislators. Yes?
You mentioned that this is a workforce plan. How true is it that even in elementary school, the children could be tested and already pigeonholed for what kind of career that they could then be trained the rest of their lives in?
Right. There is an initiative in the states called Career Pathways. And career pathways can actually exist without Common Core, and Common Core can exist without career pathways. And so it is a different initiative where they do want to put, the state passed it. I think the kids they have to select 17, there's 17 different career pathways that they can select to go into. And I have heard, I just heard, that kids at the elementary level the counselors are coming into the classrooms and telling them what careers that they can choose from. In the middle school, they have to select a career path. So by 9th grade, they get in and they go that path. I do know that their high schools will have a higher score on the way that they're scoring schools now if their kids don't hop career pathways. So much for flexibility. But we're not really focusing on that as we go through the Common Core, but we do know that the slowing down of the different subject areas and the way that they're teaching the kids to only be able to read manuals, because why would you want to read Beowulf if I pronounce that right, Beowulf, if you're going to, go to plumbing school, which is a very good job. I say bring back vocational schools. I grew up in both the years of vocational schools, and those were wonderful. It gave kids a trade, but they got to choose what they wanted to do. But they also came out with a good, solid, rounded education, and they didn't digress in the math and the language arts like they're doing now. So that answers your question. Yes, yes, sir.
2 points that you mentioned that I'd just like to have clarified. Number one, you said you've already met with the governor. And just a moment ago, in answer to this gentleman's question, you indicated that the states want to retain their own sovereignty, and that's why many states will reject this. What answer do you get from our governor of why he accepts it? Why does he want to give up Georgia's sovereignty? Why does he want to commit us to such a financial burden? And why does he want to dumb down our students?
He wants to bring good jobs to Georgia, and I give him credit for that. I think we want good jobs in Georgia, but there's this idea that Georgia was ranked 48th in the nation in education. I heard this the other day. Again, we were ranked so low in the country, and how can we bring good jobs and how can we bring companies in if our education is not so good? Well, these Common Core standards will help us be able, will be alike with the other states. Our comments are this: why can't Georgia pull itself up? If things aren't working down at the Department of Education, get rid of them. Get rid of them. Don't sell our souls over to the federal government and national standards. But his talk normally says that he wants to bring jobs, good jobs in, and he feels that this, perhaps I guess, this is not his quote, but Common Core is the great equalizer among the states. I say we have enough ingenuity in our state. We've got Georgia Tech. They're a high technology, a high collegiate school of technology and math. Why don't they tell us what we need in our schools instead of, the national, the special interests? Remember, there's special interests that are telling us what we need. But his line is jobs. That's what we hear all the time, and I don't get it either.
So he's willing to compromise everything else.
We have asked him that. He believes in state sovereignty, but he is not. His answer is jobs. Yes, sir.
My question on top of what he just said is, if it is a constitutional right for a state to run its own education system, how in the world can a state give up its constitutional right to a federal power or to any entity without a constitutional change? How does a simple majority or even an executive order override a constitutional law? That to me makes no sense. In fact, that can override almost everything where we've given money, highway money, everything. I don't understand that principle. I don't know where it comes from, how we override the Constitution by simple contractual exchanges.
Well, we did it, back in 2008 and 9, we were in pretty dire straits in the states. We were going through a really, really bad recession. And the current administration figured out that they could bring and rope people in through money. And we just happened to have a governor at the time who felt like we needed money. And we've still got a governor who still thinks that race to the top is fine. And we've got to get around the idea that we need federal money. And we are getting rope tied in, and we're selling our souls for $1. We're selling our souls for $1 because we can't try to get ourselves out. That seems to be the mentality these days, that we can't find can't work the hard way out. If you've ever been in a lot of debt and get yourself out of debt, it takes work. It's hard work to get yourselves out. And, Georgia can pull ourselves up. And we don't get it. We go back to that question on why is it that we get it, but the elected officials don't. And I think a lot of it is money. It's money. Yes, ma'am. In the back.
We have board members here, and not wanting to put them on the spot, but what is their reaction to your presentation? Because I found it fascinating, and I find myself madder than a wet hen, even
extremely informative, and I appreciate what you said, and I will do my own investigation. A lot of what you said is correct, and the federal government is controlling a lot of what we have to do at the local level. I do know that this week I did get a email from Rob Goodall's office, and there is legislation that is being proposed at the national level that is to limit the authority of the Secretary of Education in trying to control what states have to do. And it goes, it's a whole big, several pages of stuff I was reading, which is a huge step in the right direction.
Absolutely.
And we all know that education went downhill when the Department of Education was established. And of course, that's just a note back on that. But I totally agree with you with the race to the top of it. Our county just kept out of it from day one because we did not want to be controlled and told what to do. We did not want to participate in the writing of what was going on down there, so we did step out. A lot of the rigorous curriculum we had started years ago in Forsyth County, so we are not backing up. Our students are taking algebra in 8th grade. We are not dumbing down our curriculum here in Forsyth County at all. And our test scores prove that we're not. So I've got a lot of research I want to do. I don't mind somebody like Bill Gates, if he wants to put his money in education, fine. But I don't want him, as you say, controlling exactly the whole agenda. Now, we did take a small grant from the federal government of about $4.5 million and have improved the delivery of education. We've invented with a private sector person a website which will enable parents and teachers to go to that website and have all the information they need to help their students. It's a one-of-a-kind thing. And it's with a program called It's Learning. And we use that money to improve our delivery and improve communication with parents. So there are ways to do this where you can use private sector dollars to do better with our students. So a lot of what you said, I totally agree with you. It does scare me what's going on, and the cost of this test is outrageous, and we did have a good system. So I think that we just need to all be very aware, but I do want to assure you that schools in Forsyth County are very good school systems, and we do lead the way. We use a lot of technology because we want to be open with what's going on in our school system. And if you have concerns, we certainly are not afraid to hear from people. We welcome you. Our emails, our phone numbers are out there. So we want to listen, we want to have this discussion, and I certainly have learned a lot from you tonight.
Well, thank you, and we would love for you to have a DVD. We give those DVDs to our elected officials. We would love for you to have one. If it would help, maybe then Acre Region can read that. So thank you for sharing that. I didn't know if another wanted to share.
Is it an alternative to just say no?
Good question. No, because there is some good civil disobedience wanting to happen out there through an opt-out for Common Core. And the problem is in my view, and I know, and I'm always interested in the board members' view because they have to do a policy, but if you put an opt-out policy in place, normally it's for, like if there's maybe in sex ed class, you can opt out, or if there is gosh, I can't think, what do kids go to? An assembly, and you don't want your child to attend that assembly, then you can opt out. You have that authority as a parent that they can opt out. The problem is with Common Core, if you opt out, where are they going to go? It's taught in every class. There's no class in the school that doesn't have it because it's all common. We have to have everything common. And just to comment on that, I'll express it even more. I know several years ago, there's a real paradigm shift in the way that teachers taught. It used to be that teachers were very autonomous in the classroom, and I taught high school, and I could just go in and I knew I had to teach the standards, but I could do it the way I wanted to, and there's just a real autonomy. There's a makeup and a fiber of a teacher that can be in a classroom and can self-manage themselves and those types of things. That has gone away. We've got common planning, common testing, common assessments. If you're in high school, I taught history, you had to have the same quizzes, the same tests. Because if one student moved from one class to another, you had to have that commonality. So all of a sudden, we get this kind of this group thing. You know, that's happening in public schools anyway, where the kids just are always grouped together and all of that type of thing. So just the idea that everything is common, there's no way that a teacher over here is going to be doing anything different. So there's no way to get out of it. The only way to get out of it is to reverse course and say, you know, that Race to the Top grant's over in September of 2014. We received $400 million, and I didn't mention this, we received $400 million one-time grant money. We spend $13 billion a year in tax money for education. So you see how we sold our soul? We got $100 million a year for 4 years, but we paid $13 billion a year in tax dollars for education. And so I kind of like Senator Liggett when he spoke at an event we had. He said, you know, we're kind of like Jacob and Esau. We sold our birthright. We have sold our birthright. And our birthright here is local control of education. And there isn't an alternative. That's why it's so important to pass this legislation. And we think we have a really good opportunity to do that if we can get the grassroots involved to make those changes. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Yes.
I am a homeschool mom. And of course, my first thought was, it doesn't apply to me. Because I don't have to teach that way. However, it is my understanding that one of the guys that was one of the instigators, he's now the head of the college board. And I think you mentioned this earlier, that he was going to be influencing the changes to the SAT and ACT such that they will also, you know, we'll have to teach the math the way the Common Core does, just so that our kids can pass the ACT. I'm just hoping my kids get through it before everything can be implemented. That's my goal.
And that is the threat to the homeschools, to the private schools, to the charter schools in Georgia. The charter schools have to take the same tests. So there ain't going to be anything different about charter schools because they're going to have to take the test. That's how it's built in. And let me tell you one more thing about what's up with David Coleman. They have hired they put together a little lobby group to go out and lobby conservative groups and organizations. And so they're going in and they're talking the talk, and they're saying how great this is for private Christian schools, Christian colleges, organizations perhaps like Concerned Women for America. You know, we're a very conservative organization, and they have put together a lobby group because they realize that we're a problem, and now they're out there trying to sell it. And I will tell you, it's making some traction because David Coleman knows how to talk the talk. I've never watched him on YouTube, but I think he's pretty persuasive, so I hear. But they're smart. They know what they're doing.
But my question about it is, when you're talking testing, and being that I'm not in the school system, the only thing I ever hear is CRCT. Okay. Is that the type of test they're talking about? A once-a-year test for advancement in grade? Or is it going to be the every 6 weeks tests are common also? How is that going to work? What do they mean when they say testing?
Okay, when we're, and I am definitely not a testing expert, but you know, teachers give tests in the classroom. And so they have their tests, and you know, that they test on content and so forth. But when we talk about the national test, we're talking about like the high stakes tests, like the CRCT.
Okay.
So that's what they're the annual test. There's all sorts of different tests out there, but they're talking about the more high stake tests. Yes. Another question. Judy.
I just had a comment. Want to give a plug for your DVD. There's so much. This is really a much more complicated presentation that Tanya gave tonight. That's in what's in the DVD. But I always want to encourage everyone to get a couple of those and think of leaders in your community, maybe homeowners presidents, that could show it. It's 30 minutes long. That could do it as a program, and it's really excellent. So,
we need to get parents engaged in this. Parents are very busy people, and we're having a hard time engaging the parents because their life is so busy. But I will tell you that when I educated the parent behind me who's got a second grader, a fourth grader, and then they've got a preschooler, she was so upset. And so we've got to begin to educate parents and make them understand that this is not good for them. It's not good for their kids. And so anytime you can get to parents and just begin to educate them and spark and get them to think, we need to get them engaged on this. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am, in the back.
Well, I have a comment and a question. One was that, I know last month we had someone come talk to the Tea Party about just education in general. And one thing he said was the federal government is really great at creating a problem to then come in and create a solution with their money. So that's just something to think about. But also, going along with what Debbie said,
So true.
I know at the Georgia Home Educators Convention, we had the lawyer who's defending.
Jane Robbins?
Yeah, she came and spoke, and that opened my eyes. Because a lot of home educators don't believe that this is going to affect us. But she mentioned a statistic, I don't know if you know it, about how many states have to opt out before College Board or ACT will tweak it, or if they can, there was some statistic like so many percent or so many have to stay out of it for them to, before they'll tweak it.
I don't know that. That would be, I could ask Jane Robbins that. I could funnel that answer through you to send out, but I don't know. That's interesting. I don't know that side of it that well, so I will find out that statistic because that's interesting to me on that. So the push to get those out. Okay, yeah, I'm not familiar with that statistic. Yes, sir, in the back.
I didn't see it. You may have already explained why. But history and government, where does that fit in with this?
Yeah,
If it doesn't fit in today, when are they planning to put it in?
They're working on it. I do know that you've got, now, this is what I'll talk about, the next generation science. You know, that was a national push. Dr. Barge has said that Georgia is not going to take most of the next generation science and that they're revisiting some of the standards in that. I think there was a big outcry on that. So that's still in development. But we were at a panel event with him and I used the next generation science as an example of the next big federal push. And he had to correct me. So evidently they had just decided that they weren't going to do that. Social studies, the frameworks are, all of that's being done behind closed doors. But one thing about the Common Core, it is not science and it's not social studies. However, the framework will be in place to have, we'll give you grant money for your state if you adopt the social studies standards. That's how we think it'll probably happen. Because Dr. Barge is on record that says there'll be bloodshed, over the social studies standards. But you know what? If you've got people that love federal money, that's all it's going to take. Because people know, back in the 90s, they tried to push through national standards starting with social studies. And Jane Robbins is on this DVD and she covers that. It was such an outcry that they passed a resolution 99-1 to say no national standards. And the person that voted against it said the resolution didn't go far enough. So they recognize that that's a very controversial subject to push through, so they're putting in the less controversial subjects now, math and language arts, getting everyone comfortable, and then they'll put it, then the framework's in place to bring it in, and then all they gotta do is dangle a carrot of money, and if you've got an administration in the state that needs money or likes it, thinks it's a great job, we're concerned about that. So that's where we're at. They're being developed, they're just not out yet. Yes?
The bill that you're looking at, 27, I think it was, that knocked out the Common Core.
Yes.
What would be the ramifications for the state of Georgia relative to the $400,000?
The $400 million, well, the grant is over in September, so we've received our money and we've met our obligation of the grant. So, and a good question is, well, where do we go from here? Because we do hear that. I think that's in 2010, Georgia had some Georgia performance standards that really weren't that bad. So we said, let's go back to the 2010 Georgia performance standards and then put together Senate Bill 203, put together an advisory committee that's the bottom up, get parents involved, get school board members involved, get teachers involved, and let's look at the Common Core standards. You don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Not all of the Common Core standards are all bad, but go in there and look look, but let the state decide what it needs. Get the colleges involved. What is it that we need to teach in math? Get the colleges involved in that. And pick and choose what's the best. I think that's the key thing is Indiana has great math standards. Massachusetts had the best language arts standards. Let's go pick and choose, but let's let us do it and not, someone telling us. So there are options out there that you're not leaving, schools high and dry. What we do here as well, this is quoted in the paper, that, the reason the tests are so bad is because teachers are constantly changing curriculum. Well, yeah, I think there's a lot of fluidity that goes on, but this is what I say to that. Common Core is bad enough that I think we need to reverse course. I get this constant changing of curriculum at the DOE level and the teachers have to adjust. I think this is bad enough and scary enough and dangerous enough that we have got to reverse course. Otherwise, we're really locked in. Yes?
If they're so all about the money, why are they not seeing the difference between $8 and $100 per child per year?
They do. They do see this. And so they're trying to come up with different solutions on the testing. And we applaud that, and we feel like the Common Core is going to break under the testing thing. But what I didn't like in this, I think it was in this article where it says Common Core test too costly. The Department of Education says, well, we can look at different testing alternatives, but we sure do like those standards. So they're kind of still digging in their heels and not saying that let Georgia decide on our standards. They still want to hold on to the Common Core standards. If that's what Georgia decides, great, but let us decide it. Get us out of it and let us decide on that. But I was a little bit surprised it was in the very end of the article. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Not a question, it's more of a comment from all that you've shared. And the fact of the way this went about being presented, kind of stealth, like a former bill, the Obamacare.
Yes, doesn't it
But
though?
it doesn't seem to be working too well today. It seems to be disintegrating. And I think this is the same thing, but we still have to be involved to make a difference. Otherwise, it's going to continue to roll over us.
Absolutely. Matter of fact, one of our statements we wrote, while we were worried and going through all that Obamacare mess, they were working on this. So while we were distracted on Obamacare, they were working on what we call Obama Core. And you are exactly right. I heard on the news today, they were saying that, the health care bills, they want to break under the weight of such a top-down and not a bottom-up type structure. And the same thing is being said about a Common Core. The problem is if it takes a generation to go away, well, then we've lost a generation of kids. And do you want it to be your kids or your grandkids that suffer on this? So we say eradicate it now, but you're right, it won't go away unless we do what we've done with Obamacare, and that is to continue the constant drumbeat. We are so laser focused on this, and that drumbeat is there, and it's just education, education. Every time we educate someone, we run them to our side because they see the logic of it. It's all about state sovereignty and letting us choose. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Again, apologize, but I thank you first of all for bringing this presentation because I think it's going to be necessary for people like you to take a stand nationwide, not just local. It's got to be nationwide. I am deathly afraid of what our president is doing to our country. He is setting himself up to be a dictator, and there's no question about it. My question now is, our history is being rewritten for Common Core. And from what I understand about the way it's being rewritten, it's going to just barely touch on the Revolutionary War. And the history is really going to start at the Civil War rather than the...
Yeah, I've not seen those standards, and I want to make a comment on the school board member that kind of piggybacks on what he said. There are two movements at the national level. There's on the Senate side, Senator Grassley wants to defund the race to the top type thing, so they can't go in and do that. And then on the House side, they want to go in and kind of do what you do. So there is a movement. So when you're out there at town hall meetings, if you go to your congressional levels, constantly say and bring up Common Core. Let them know that it's an issue. At the COP breakfast, when Dr. Barge spoke, all of the Senate, those that were running for Senate were there, and they were on that bandwagon. We will get out of the Common Core. We want you out of the. We want out of the Common Core. Those that are running for congressional office down in over at Phil Gingry's seat, you know, they're on it. So they're hearing and they get that it is an issue that's resonating because of all that we're seeing out of Washington. I concur with you. Every day you wake up and think, well, what's next? Now what's he going to do? You know, what law is he getting around? So, am I out of time? Okay. That's okay. If you want to see me do that happen for $5 up here, but the school board members will be happy to.
Thank you so much, Tanya. There's a lot of really good information. I'm sure that everybody is now armed with a lot more. Yes, Kristen. I'm sorry.
I can wait till John wanted to say something.
Okay. No, go ahead.
Just wanted to, our Kristen Morris, thanks for on the school board with the dialogue on, I'm not sure if everybody, Annie spoke very eloquently, I'm not sure everybody did hear her mention, like, people raise the top, which I found did not out of that, did not want to attach to that. And also, anyway, she did bring up a lot of good points, some we've heard from the head on. When it comes to privacy, I know myself, I use privacy guys, and I have been working with Mike London, we have been, several of our state delegations. Mike London, the representative, asked me to convey some thoughts on him tonight. One, he says he is mostly in support of Common Core, he does have concerns, particularly on the privacy side. So two things we wanted to note, maybe you already mentioned this, that he will be the speaker at the next meeting in August on the 17th, I think it is, talking about Common Core at the Republican meeting, not the,
Okay.
not the Tea Party, but
Right.
the Forsyth. So we encourage you to come to that and see what talk about at that meeting. And then also that he is working on some legislation for next year in regards to the privacy side of that. And when it comes to privacy with the federal government and even the state government, in my opinion, there are some other bills out there, existing laws that we all may come back to for support on, but I know that I've been working with our state delegation in the field that affect our schools in regards to policy that our state legislators agree with that should not be there. It's not directly Common Core, but it's related to our schools and how we're graded in our schools, as well as back to the CWFA. So stay tuned on that, we're going to maybe come back to help.
Thank you. And for those that don't know Kristen Morris is also on our Board of Education, so she wasn't here when we introduced the others.
Sorry, I'm going to come back for.
Thank you very much. I just want to say, for me, this is a very simple issue. It is a states' right issue. That's all it is. Okay? The federal government has no business dictating anything to the states in regards to education. That's just the bottom line. You know, they take your money out of your pocket because the federal government grants, and the money comes from you. I mean, they take it out of your pocket, then they turn around and they use it to basically prostitute the states. And it's just a disgusting use of taxpayer money as far as I'm concerned. The Department of Education at federal level needs to be abolished, period, and give the power back to the states. Thank you so much, Tanya. It was a great presentation. I would encourage everybody to take the information that you've got, go out and do your own independent research on Common Core, talk to your neighbors, talk to your friends, talk to the teachers that teach your students, talk to the superintendent, talk to your local Board of Education. Go to the Board of Education meetings. I mean, we need to make sure that our voices are heard and call the governor's office as well. So I encourage you to do all of those things.